Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Today we have someone who I know you're going to love to hear from. Her name is Lana Wilhelm. Lana, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited to talk with your listeners.
Well, we have some mutual friends that we connected on before I hit record, and we may name drop a little bit as we dance forward. But if rather than me reading a long bio about you, if I happen to bump into you, maybe on the walk out of Mercy Hospital, and I said,
hmm
Lana, what do you do? How would you respond to that these days?
First and foremost, I try to inspire, but my story really started in 2021. My background had been nursing. I was currently a case manager, and June 23rd, 2021, as everyone knows, the exact moment when their crisis happened, 3 p.m., my husband experienced a stroke and rushed to Mercy Hospital. We were there for many, many weeks, then did rehab, inpatient, then outpatient, and the long journey with that. And as I sat in that ICU room, I was on the other side of the bed for the first time. I was always the nurse that came in and said, "Do you have any questions? How can I help you?" And I thought I was giving that person everything they needed. But what I realized, there was another person in that room that was scared, overwhelmed, had no idea even what to ask.
Mm.
So the answer always was, no, I'm okay. So it really broke my heart because I felt like as a health professional, I missed a huge gap. So after my husband stabilized, I started kind of my journey to help other caregivers because I didn't want another person to sit in an ICU room feeling alone.
Yeah.
And friends and family can come in and they're wonderful and they're supportive, but to talk to another person who gets it makes a world of difference.
Mm.
Sometimes I just go in and let them cry, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's funny. You brought up the term who really get it. And there's really no one that I know who really gets it to the degree you do. You were, it almost seems predestined to grab this thing and move it forward, even if it was a cross you did not want to bear. So I appreciate you holding on to it and moving forward boldly. I want to back up a little bit from the Mercy waiting room and from the experience with your husband and from where you are right now in your life. Back just a couple years, you chose healthcare. I don't think anyone stumbles into healthcare. I think you choose it. What was it about healthcare that inspired you? Why were you drawn into it?
It allowed me an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. I'm a caregiver by birth. I
Okay.
realize that. We all are by birth. And I feel like God had given me so many gifts of being a good listener, being compassionate. And I just felt like I was drawn to that field. As I got into it, I realized there are so many different avenues in nursing, and it filled a spot in my heart. When I was young, my brother had died in a car accident at 21. I remember seeing the pain in my parents' faces and loved ones, and I thought, I can make a difference. I don't know how. And I felt like nursing was my avenue to help with that.
Your brother, you don't always talk about him, so I'm really glad you brought him up. How did that experience, in addition to drawing you into healthcare, how did that change you? How did it impact your family?
Oh my goodness. There's the before and there's the after.
Yeah.
To be honest, he was young, 21. He was coming home from work, and unfortunately, a drunk driver and this was in the morning, like around 9 o'clock, was drunk with his family in the car, ran into my brother and his friend, and they both passed away. But my brother was his fourth person that he killed as a drunk driver. Yeah. Uh-huh. So when they come to your door and they knock on the door and the world just stops. My mom, to be honest, was never the same. She was just not the person she used to be. My dad, I'll never forget the day that you have to go to the morgue. It's horrible, but I remember looking out the window and seeing him bring my brother's shoe back, and he put it in the garage, and it was there until he passed away. So it really changed the whole dynamic of the family. I went from being the middle child to the oldest child.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I went from being the child to kind of the parent to help my parents through this phase. And even though it was a very negative experience, it was a very positive experience because I think every life experience builds on something else. And if I didn't have that, I wouldn't be here. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't be here. So I try to look back and think of, yeah, that was a really rough time, but boy, it built some skills I never thought I'd have,
Mm.
and compassion. So when I go into a patient's room and I feel like I can relate to them.
As you and I speak, I'm reading through scripture with a group of guys every morning,
Uh,
and we are currently in the book of Job. And
oh,
it's this entire book, ultimately, of unexplained suffering.
yep.
Just this wrestle of why would I lose a family member? And why would I lose this thing? And ultimately, it's this reliance on God's will, not yours. And that is a
Hmm.
very, very, very difficult thing to accept at any phase in life. And at age, you were a young girl at that point,
16. Yeah,
16, you began to embrace it. And in doing so, it did not make it easy, but it did open up your heart for compassion. And that
it
heart
did.
toward compassion would influence what you did for the next 4 decades professionally. So,
It,
and
it really
now
did.
what you're doing in your ministry. So it's a remarkable thing if we can just shut our eyes and keep stepping forward, how even the worst things in life can, in fact, in time be used for good. I'm curious, before we talk about your role as a healthcare provider, you met your husband along the journey.
Hmm.
Before you talk about the stroke, what was your life like before the stroke for those decades? What kind of life did you build together?
It was a great life. We had our ups and downs. We had our moments when we've loved each other every day, but there's some days we didn't like each other so much. You know how that
I don't know
is.
what
Like,
you're
well,
talking about, but anyway, on to the next question.
but it was a good, it was a great marriage. We had plans. We have two children. One lives in LA and one lives here in St. Louis. We have two grandchildren. We worked our whole life to get to a point where we were going to retire and travel and do all these things. And, they always say, be careful with your plans. Don't tell God your plans. He just laughs. But then it opened up a whole different avenue. Maybe we're not going to travel like we had wanted to, but we've been able to change our home we redid our backyard to make it more of a vacation kind of a spot. So you kind of, there's things he can't do, but what can he do? And he's doing well right now. So that's wonderful.
Well, you mentioned that's right now. There's the before and after, not only in your mom and dad's life and in your life as a kid, but there's also before and after in your current family's life and in your marriage. So take us back to that day in 2021 when your life changed. You mentioned 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What happened?
Mhm. I was working from home at the time. It was during COVID, and I had bought something for the grandkids, and I don't know, it came back and it was junk. So I said, "Can you take it back to Kohl's?" So he went into the garage to take it back and didn't come back out, didn't come back out. And after 40 years, my first response was, "What is he doing in the garage?" So I kind of walked there, and as he came through, he was kind of staggering and didn't look well. And my first thought was, his blood sugar was down. He's a diabetic. And then within moments, I could tell it was a stroke. And his words to me were, something's really wrong. My husband's tall, he's 6'2". So I got him to a chair. I called 911, and I mean, they were there within seconds. And it's just kind of a blur. But they got him out of the house and to Mercy within, oh gosh, I don't know, 15 minutes, which was wonderful. So then we got to the emergency room. And, you're in a room and you remember this, there's 15, 16 people all frantically running around the room trying to save your husband's life. And,
Yes.
I'm sitting there thinking, okay, am I going to be a widow? What,
Yeah.
wait, do I call the kids? What do I do? And they're asking me questions, and you're overwhelmed. And I remember calling my best friend on the way to the hospital, and I don't know who all I called, but I kept hitting the wrong numbers because you're so nervous. And then they met me there, but of course they couldn't come in because of COVID. My son came in, and it's just girls and boys, I hate to say it, are just different. My son comes in and he goes, "Mom, don't worry. I'm off this weekend. I can help you get dad home." You know? And I was like, okay, well, and it was denial. He just couldn't handle it. My daughter was in LA, and, I called and she's like, "Should I come?" I'm like, I couldn't make a decision if I had to. But my friend called and said, "Get in here immediately." So, we went from there to the intensive care unit where it was touch and go for, oh gosh, 3 weeks. We went out to the regular floor, and unfortunately, he had another small stroke, back in the ICU, and then on to rehab. So, during that journey, they're asking me these questions of, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? And even though we had talked about it, as a couple, when the question really comes to you, it's like, what? We're supposed to do this when we're 80, not
Yes.
when we're in their 60s. So
When
it
you
was kind
say
of
they were asking me, what do you want to do? Was it, we're at a crossroads here, and
yeah.
we've got to decide whether we keep fighting for this or we finally let it go. And wife, what do you want to do for your husband? Is that the decision that was being placed in front of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the first 24, 48 hours. It was kind of, we didn't know how he was going to do. And my husband was an engineer. His superpower was his brain. Some people are the athletes, some people, and it seems like stroke seems to hit people that their superpower is their brain, so to speak.
Well, I should
Um,
be in good shape then. Something
Me
else will hit
too.
me.
Yeah. But they're asking me, okay, we don't know how bad this is. Do you want us to continue? But he was alert during all this, but he was not answering appropriately. So I had to make all those decisions. Do we want to give him this drug? Do we not want to give him this drug? At one point, I remember we were waiting and waiting to get, there's a blockbuster that they give to help. And you can't give it unless a blood pressure is a certain level. So they kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally I said, you know, I know I am just a case manager nurse, but I said, can someone just take a manual blood pressure? And the doctor's like, great idea. So they took the manual blood pressure, and sure enough, it was at the right level so he could get the medication. So, we kind of went from maybe a widow, maybe not a widow, then to the ICU of who's going to come home with me if he comes home. And then, okay, now he's going to come home with me. What is this going to look like? And
How do you in that role balance holding the hand of a husband who you said I do to essentially 40 years earlier, at the same time holding the clipboard of a case manager, which you'd been doing successfully for years and years, and also with a background in nursing, ICU nursing, and neuro. I mean, you had all these expertise, but at the end of the day, more than all those, you're a wife. You're just your husband's spouse.
that is absolutely where I see that I found the huge gap. I knew what they were doing. I knew, the machines, I knew everything medically. But when the doctors would come in, when you're in the spouse mode, you forget all of that other things because all you're really listening to is what a little glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
And when they come in, the looks on their face, what those mean. When they said, well, let's give it another hour. I know what that means on the other side. I had to be an advocate for him because he couldn't. His number one concern while he was in the intensive care unit was the housekeeping lady. Don't even, I know. So every day they do like the neural checks and stuff, and he would be like, Lana, that woman comes in every day and no one ever sees her. That's just how I feel in this bed. And he said, and she comes in and she empties the trash and she brings it out. So before he left the unit, he's like, I need you to go get her flowers. Because
Gosh.
so it was, and he was never that kind of person before. He would have never even noticed her before. So that was kind of an odd thing, that changed.
That's something that changed within him, and you know my story. We have mutual
Yeah.
friends at Mercy, and you know what housekeeping, environmental services did in my
Whew,
recovery. So thank God
exactly.
for those who go into the corners and do the work quietly and humbly.
Yeah.
Uh, that's something you noticed about your husband. What did you begin noticing about yourself emotionally?
I realized that I was stronger than I thought I was,
Wow.
that I could handle more than I thought I could. But I also realized that I needed to be vulnerable. And I've always been the nurse in charge, the child
Yes.
in charge, the mom in charge. And I had to be vulnerable and I had to ask for help. I had to treat my children as adults and say, this is what we're dealing with versus the mom in me that just wanted to say, it's so good, it's fine, I got it under control. It's a disservice to them. They needed to know and be treated as an adult. So that vulnerability was really, really hard. And that's kind of what started me to write Stroke and the Spouse, because I kind of wrote, kind of what happened through our story, but more importantly, how to help caregivers through those first 2 years. And, I was working with a book coach and I'd write a chapter and she'd come back and she's like, dig deeper. And it was hard. It was very hard to be vulnerable and say, I can't control this. I have no control. I'll be honest. I went through a phase of just really being angry at God. I was like, how could you do this? Then I would turn it over to God, but about a half hour later, take it back.
Yeah.
you know,
But a lot of folks listen to our podcast, but there's also a group that watch. And when you were talking about digging deeper, the viewers probably saw me smirk a little bit, and it wasn't me smirking at you. It was me
no.
hearing those same words from the folks who helped me write books, like John, go deeper, go deeper. In other words, be vulnerable, which is
And I
very
don't like
hard
that.
as a writer. It's also very hard as a caregiver. It's very hard as a human being. So you mentioned that you were in Mercy for about a month, eventually into rehab. How long before you brought your husband home?
Oh gosh, about 7 weeks.
What was his physical condition at that point like, and what was his emotional or mental capabilities
Um,
like?
Emotionally, he was very depressed. From his stroke, he suffers from severe apathy. Just really doesn't care about anything. Physically, he was still struggling with speech. He was using a wheelchair walker combo type of thing, not able to really, his was balance and that sort of thing. We were having difficulty with that. I remember the day we brought him home, we had him in his chair and he was tired and his speech was horrible and I couldn't understand what he wanted and
Yeah.
no one could. I remember my little granddaughter was here and she comes in, she goes, "Oh, Pop wants his Kindle." And I'm like, "How do you know that?" She's like, "Oh, I talk toddler." And we all it just broke. I mean, she was just very serious.
Yes.
Yeah. So when he came home, it was a challenge. We had to redo a lot of the things in the house. I had to go to Home Depot into this section of screws and bolts. And I remember standing there thinking, number one, why do men need so many of these? There
Yeah.
can't be this many uses for these. And then secondly, I stood there and just cried because that was the moment I realized our roles have changed. What he did and what I did are now I do versus a couple.
So many of the stories we hear on these types of shows or podcasts are the big explosions or the mighty strokes or the homecomings. And I think the real beauty and the sadness and ultimately the redemption is found in that store in the aisle when you're staring at a bunch of screws and you just lose it.
Yeah.
Because normally this isn't your job, it's somebody else's. It's such a relatable thing that I think most of us have at one point or another experienced. You also talked about bringing your husband home and the
Yeah.
family's all around. And as you know, my dad had Parkinson's disease, and there was
Right.
a moment when yet another, in this case, it was a bowel blockage. And finally, we get him
Um,
out of the hospital, we get him home. And so, like, everyone's high five, and we did it. And that night, we realized, how in the world are we going to do this tomorrow? Like, it's
yep.
one thing to get him out of the wheelchair and get him into the home and get him situated and hairbrush back and not face washed. But then you realize very quickly, this is out of control. Like we have
Yeah.
utterly no control, and we don't know how we did it today. We're exhausted, and tomorrow morning's coming early. What was the hardest thing for you to recognize and admit when you first brought your husband home?
I think the hardest thing that for me was when everybody left and it was just the two of us in the house. And I had the realization that this is a marathon. This isn't a sprint.
Right.
This is a lifestyle now. I think just getting a routine, figuring out what to do and how I was going to do it physically. And at the time I was still working and I thought, oh, I can work and take care of him. And that lasted about 6 months and I had to retire. But John, I tell you, the big realization was the very first day that we had to get him ready for rehab. I got a van that would pick him up and take him, which was wonderful. So I had everything planned. I had it all set up. We were going to have the perfect morning. Well, we didn't have the perfect morning. I got him in the shower. We got out of the shower. There were some issues. I had to get him back in the shower. So we got him dressed. I get him down the steps and getting him ready to eat. And the bus pulls up to pick him up. I'm not ready. So I'm like panicky. I throw a protein bar at him. I'm like, I get him out to the bus. I get him on. I get the wheelchair and I bring it into the garage. And I'm thinking, I did it. I got him out there. Well, how you have that feeling like something's happening? All of a sudden, I looked around, the wheelchair is going down the hill in our house. And I'm like running down the hill to catch this crazy wheelchair. And like 3 houses down, I finally knock it over and I fall on the grass. And I just sat there and just start laughing. I'm
Wow.
like, I'm like, okay, this is not going well. It was just, I've learned that everybody says, there's plan A and there's plan B. I think as a caregiver, you have plan Z
Yeah.
because you really don't know what's going to happen from day to day. And if you don't laugh, if you don't scream, if you don't get angry, it just builds inside, and then you explode. And that's not good for anybody.
You mentioned that you brought home a husband who had a brilliant mind and a
Hmm.
beautiful heart and a ton of energy, and you brought him home in a wheelchair, and he was apathetic, which
Hmm.
means you're dealing with a man who is no longer the man that he was at 2:59 the day of the stroke. Like apathy,
Exactly.
like that's a very difficult personality trait, to be honest, to have someone who is completely apathetic in their marriage, in their faith walk, in their life. He's in a wheelchair. And then you said, I'm getting him ready for rehab. And John, I got him in the shower and I got him out, dried him up. And then you're like, and then I got him back in, and you laughed. But for anyone who's ever gotten someone in and out of a shower, to only have to get them back into a shower, they know what you're talking about. And it's not a
Yep,
laughing matter, it's agony. And then you
it
see the
is.
bus pull up and you race him out and you get him on, and then the wheelchair goes down the hill. And you mentioned I tackled the wheelchair, I ended up on the grass, and I started laughing. And I'm thinking I would have been crying and worse.
Mm.
So, my friend, as you are on the grass crying and laughing and thinking, what has become of my life? What kept you going?
I think a couple things. I think first kept me going is that I made that commitment to Rick 40 some years ago. Good, bad, indifferent, we're a team. And I knew that if it had happened to me, he would be the guy laying on the grass. So I think first and foremost is, I thought, okay, I got to hold on to who he is, not who I want him to be, but who he is. And then secondly, as I laid there, I looked up to the heavens and I'm like, okay, you knocked me down. I got it. When I get back up, I need your help. I think that point was my turning point of I can't do this alone. I need God to help me. And some days I give him a list of things I think he needs to help me with, and he laughs. And some days the days go great. You just don't know. But I think it was really that moment of loving that person through thick and thin. And that's just who we were.
And for the folks who are working out right now, or they're driving and they're dropping off their kids or their parents somewhere, and it's easy to miss lines that if you actually heard them, it might change your life. And here's something I just heard from Lana. She mentioned that I decided to love him for who he is, not who I wish he would be.
Hmm.
That's a thing right there, to love people for who they actually are, not for who they wish they would be, or how they you wish they might show up. So how do you grieve someone who is still lying next to you, who is still eating cereal next to you, who is still in your driveway with you, whose wheelchair you're still tackled on the
Yeah.
front yard of a neighbor's three doors down? How do you love someone who's still with you? What's that look like for you to grieve that?
It's really, really hard. You're grieving the loss of that person, really. For him, holding your hand is really hard because it throws him off. You can't hold hands when we walk. Touch is really difficult for him. I had to find other ways. I'll tell you, there's been many, many evenings when I go up to the shower, and that's my crying booth, so to speak. You know, I would try to talk to him and share how I was feeling, but he couldn't respond back because of the apathy. There, there was a night we were sitting around the fire pit outside, and I was just having a bad day, and I was crying, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore, type of thing. A typical conversation we would have had prior. And he just kind of looked at me and he's like, I'm kind of cold. I think I'm gonna go get a sweater. And then he walked away. And so that's really been really, really hard. I try to hold on to those good moments and the things. We had our grandchildren in for 2 weeks, the past 2 weeks, and I could see him light up with them. And so I kind of hold on to those things. But it's a different kind of love. It's not the couple type of thing anymore. It's more caregiver, patient type of love. But it's change and it's hard. It's really hard.
I'm going to ask you a question that's hard to even ask. It's why I'm pausing. But were there moments in the early recovery where you wondered if a different pathway for him would have been the path that you would have chosen if you could go back in time and do it again?
Oh, I've thought it many times. Maybe it would have been easier if I was a widow.
Right.
And, when I talk to other caregivers, a lot of us think that same way. And it's not that we don't love our loved one or that we want bad things to happen, but it's like, maybe it would have been easier, or I could have remembered him the way he was versus the way he is, and, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, frequently I think that way. And then, we maybe watch a movie together or we do something together that I enjoy. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I'm here. I tell you, it's really hard now to go out to lunch with girlfriends or, friends or that sort of thing, because typically we women will sit around and be like, oh, you won't believe what he did. Ah, nah, nah, nah. That's just typical women talk. Not that we're bashing men by any means, but just, the typical things
I
that you
hear
talk
you.
about. Yeah. And now I sit there and I think I would give both arms to have those arguments,
So I'm curious because I always wonder, there's a line between being saintly and being honest. Do you ever say to those girls as they're sipping on Arnold Palmer's, you know what? Can I just be honest with you, ladies, for one freaking minute? I would give anything if he would leave his sweater at the sink again or not do the dish. Like, where you can just remind them the very thing they're complaining about one day they will be grieving the loss of. Do
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
share that with them or do you keep that in your own heart?
Initially, I kept it in my own heart. And, they always ask how Rick's doing, but not how I'm doing. And, everything's always, oh, it's fine. It's fine. Because that's what people want to hear. But after a while, you get to the point where you're like, no, that I'm like, you're lucky to have those
Yes.
arguments. And, you lose some friends over this, and you kind of, our network gets smaller because Rick doesn't really he lost the sense of taste. And so going out to dinner is something that he does not enjoy. If we're more in a group of more than like another couple, it's really difficult for him. And so, we've had to change all of that. The people that I surround myself get it, or they kind of know. I had a girlfriend just the other day going, you look like you need a lunch. And we sat down and she's like, okay, sister, let loose. And it wasn't she was going to fix anything. It's just I needed to vent a little bit. And then we moved on.
Thank God for beautiful friends like that and for incredible caregivers like you. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about my own mom
Oh,
and the decades long of times people would ask, how's Denny? Because dad had
mm,
Parkinson's disease. And
mhm.
I think about my own mom and dad and the 5 or so years where they would continually be asked, how's John? How is John doing as he recovers from burns? And I think about my siblings and how often they would go off to school and hear, man, how is your brother? Is he doing
Mhm.
okay? And what hurts me to even like ask about is I always have felt that the patient gets almost way too much credit and the caregiver gets way too little. You know,
Mhm.
all the focus is on how is that brave patient. And my gosh, that brave patient can do nothing without everybody else around them helping them do exactly the things they are doing that you're asking about. So, why? Let's start here. Why is it that the caregiver becomes invisible? Why does that just happen across the board?
I think the main reason, like while they're in the hospital, the focus is so much on the patient, and there's so few resources, support for that caregiver. And I think caregivers have never had an advocate. Caregivers in general just kind of take it on, and they feel guilty that they say that they have needs because the person they're caring for is in a much worse condition physically or whatever. So you feel guilty by even saying that I have a need or help me. So it would be the advocate. What I think healthcare professionals need to know is that if you do not have an educated, engaged caregiver, you're going to have a patient that comes in the hospital again and again and again.
Yes.
Because in all honesty, I make sure the medicines get ordered. I make sure this happens. I make sure that happens. I go to all of his appointments with him to make sure we do everything. So if I'm not around, what happens?
Yeah.
That person, has to be somewhere. So I think people don't understand how important that role is. And that's kind of what I've been advocating for the last few years, is really trying to get out there and say caregivers, and I like to refer to also as care partners, because, at this point, I don't have to do the shower and the physical care anymore, but I'm his partner in his care. So that gives him some ownership of it too.
So I'm going to ask you three relatively specific questions around care partners or caregivers. The
Uh-huh.
first is from someone who is listening to this conversation because they just began this journey. their spouse was just burned or just dealing with a stroke or coming home with a cancer diagnosis or whatever the
Uh,
thing is that now makes us a role that we did not have before 2:59 that afternoon. And now we've got the inflection point and everything has changed. So someone is beginning the journey that you are now 4, 5 years into. What advice would you give us care partners who are dealing with a spouse on the front side of a journey like this?
I think the first thing I would say is that you're not alone. You are not alone and that your role is incredibly important and you need to advocate for yourself. So when you're in that intensive care unit with your loved one, it's very important for you to, when they come around and make rounds, stand there with them.
Yeah.
Listen to it one on one. I think the other thing emotionally, what I think is ask the case manager, ask the nurse, is there someone that's in a similar situation that I can talk to that can guide me through? We at Mercy, they were so gracious to purchase my book for all the new stroke patients. And, we give that to them and kind of just something that they can hold on to. So I think the number one thing is you're not alone. There are resources out there and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
You mentioned caregiving takes many roles, and for
Mm.
sure. So this time, don't speak to the spouse, speak to the child, but the adult child.
Ah,
We are, I'm in my late 40s. This generation that I'm part of is now being considered the sandwich generation. So we're raising
mm-hmm.
up kids, we're changing their diapers, we're launching them into college. And at the same time, we're trying to figure out how do we be the daughter or the son of while also parenting up those who raised us. So for those of us who are children, who are loving our parents and not sure how to help them in the next stage in their life, how do you help us become better care partners? What advice would you give us?
Oh, absolutely. When I wrote the second book, Stroke and the Caregiver, I put a lot of focus on the adult children. And the main reason being is they're a key component. And so, what I would recommend to the child is first and foremost, the first thing you want to say to your parent is, whatever you need, I'll do. Whatever you need, I'll do it. No, 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 no. Go home, talk to your family and say, okay, this is the situation we're dealing with. Dad has Parkinson's. Then you as a family decide what can you really do to help and be honest. So that way the patient and the primary caregiver knows what to expect. So they're not calling you every day because they don't want to do that. They want to be more independent. And for example, my daughter lives in LA. So I need to, if I need her to come in, I need to know what she can do. For example, she's like, we don't live here, but we can pay for the grass to get cut, that kind of stuff. So I think that's really important. The other thing is that for them to understand, and I do a lot of talking with the adult children, is that they're also grieving. They've now lost their dad or their mom. A great example is, my kids would go to Rick for advice on this and that. And I noticed that they're starting to pull away a little bit just because they don't know how to handle it. And they're trying to juggle their family and everything that's going on. So I think with the adult children, I think a family meeting, everybody is kind of really saying what they really
Yes.
can or cannot do and how they feel. The other thing I think adult children forget is their spouses. They need to go back and say, okay, this is happening to my dad as our family unit. What can we both do? What will work for you? What will, because the worst thing that can happen is you are so stressed taking care of your dad or trying to help your mom that um,
You lose your own
in,
marriage and your
you
own
lose your
quality.
own marriage. And
Yes.
that breaks the patient and the primary caregiver's heart. We don't want our children to have to go through that.
We have one more question around this, and you and I share a friend named Mary Wilcox. She was one of
Yes,
my
yes,
nurses. She's one of your dear friends. She's also a Hollywood starlet because
yes.
she's been a background talent in the film Soul on Fire. So if you haven't met Mary, go ahead and watch Soul on Fire, and you'll see her the background on all the healthcare scenes at Mercy because that's where I first met her. She's awesome. But the reason why at the theater, when the movie came out, I had not the actor Bill Macy or John Corbett or Stephanie Shostak or all the others in the front row, but my mom and my siblings, Jim, Katie, Amy, Susan, and Laura, is because I recognized what they went through as all the spotlights of media and Mercy were on me.
Mm.
It also means they weren't on these kids. So my siblings grew up sort of without a brother
Mm-hmm.
and they sort of grew up in some regards without parents as attached to them as they could be otherwise. So the final question around care partners and caregivers is speak to those little ones who have a kid that they are growing up with who has special needs, whether it's burns or a diagnosis at birth or cancer, whatever it is that is drawing the attention of the parents and the neighbors and the coaches and teachers away from them. What encouragement would you give those of us who have siblings who need a little bit more attention?
I really feel very strongly that you need to have special time for each child and set up a date with that child that the parents are only focused on that child, not the child that's has special needs, but on you, what they enjoy, what they do. And it takes time and it takes effort. The other thing is you have to have a support network. For example, we have my niece has a special needs child. She's got three other little girls plus this little one, and so frequently I or one of the other family members will call and say, "Hey, can her name's Maggie. Why don't she come and spend the afternoon at our house?" And then gives mom time to spend with the other kids. When there's a child that's in need, I think there's also the siblings in need. And I think you need to be careful with that. You have to be careful with how you treat them. They're not caregivers.
That's right.
You got to make sure that it's not like, well, you got to take care of this child. You got to make sure he's okay. You don't want to put that pressure on them, but I think you need to give them their own special time and let them know how important they are.
Mm.
And frequently, like when someone comes to the house as an adult, it just makes me feel really good when they come to me first and say, "How's things going?" versus directly to Rick saying, "Oh, how are things going?" It just makes you feel like, okay, I'm seen. And I think that's what they need to do with children as well. It's like when you come in the house, instead of going right to John and saying, "How are you doing?" Go to one of the other siblings and say, "Oh, how's baseball? How's this happening?" Just so they feel like, oh,
That's good.
they're coming to see me as well.
Frequently, the conversations with those kids or with the spouse or whoever it is, the caregivers and partners, it ends with the neighbor or the family member saying, "Call me if you need anything." And it sincerely is a beautiful thought, but I'm sure you have an opinion on that. So help us think through a better way to say goodbye to the person who is caring for someone other than saying, "Call me if you need anything."
Yeah. Yes. And on top of that, please don't send us casseroles. Um, in my book, what I do is in each phase, I put like what family members can, our friends and family can actually do without asking. But yeah, instead of saying that, is just say, "I'm here right across the street," or, "Hey, you know what? It was great seeing you. I'm available next week on Tuesday. You want to do lunch?" Give them an action they can do, or,
Yes.
and please, please, please do not say, "You are so strong," because you have no choice. You have no choice. And then it makes you feel like you can't be vulnerable because you're supposed to be strong. So I think, when you leave that person, I think it's a, "I love you. I'm here for you" type of thing versus, "Call me if you need anything," because you're not going to call them, you know.
What's one thing someone did for you that it may not have seemed like a lot to them, but as you were going through this, as you are, this isn't an end game. You haven't
Yeah.
climbed to the top and the view is perfect. You continue forward. As as a care partner, what's something that you received from a neighbor, a family member, a friend that was meaningful, whether it's a big thing or seemingly insignificant?
One of my neighbors, and it didn't seem like a big thing, it had really, really snowed. And Rick had always been the snow person. I was sitting there looking at it and thinking, "Oh, I got to do this tomorrow. I'll let it, melt, or I got to find a kid in the neighborhood," that kind of thing. And I just went about my day and I look out and my driveway is completely clear. I see the two guys on either side of my neighborhood, my neighbors, had just done it and never even came to the door, nothing. They did my sidewalk, the whole thing. And, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much." And they're like, "No problem." And it was just, it meant so much to me that I didn't have to ask someone to do it. I didn't have to, they just, all of a sudden, it just magically happened. A couple times, a friend would call Rick and say, "Hey, why don't you come out to lunch?" And I'm like, "Oh, I got a couple hours," type of thing. Just little things like that. We have a hill in the back and I wanted to carry something up. And so I'm struggling to get it up. And my neighbor's just like, "Stop that right now," and help me. So it's again being vulnerable with people and letting them help you.
And I ask that question because I think most of us, when we see a neighbor, a family member, a friend struggling with a patient, a family member, whatever that relationship may look like, we just don't think we're powerful enough to do a thing. We're not
Mm,
that wealthy. We're not that connected. We're not that knowledgeable. And what you remind us of through those ideas is, do you have a shovel? Do you have a rake? Can you carry a 20-pound bag of mulch up the top of the hill? Can you bring in the milk?
yeah,
Can you bring
yeah,
a casserole? Maybe Lana
yeah,
doesn't want it, but I bet the neighbor might. Like the little things are never little when you're the one struggling by yourself. So
yeah.
tell me about CarePower Connect.
In 2021, part of my journey was I wrote the books just really to help myself, kind of get through this and get my thoughts out there and help others. And then the need was so great, it just grew and grew and grew. There's so many people out there that want and need support. Last October, I had a website and I had some information for people, and I started working with a group that's like, help me get it to the next level. So CarePower Connect really is a foundation, and I changed it from Stroke Caregiver Connection to CarePower Connect because it's not just stroke patients.
Agreed.
It's such a large group of people that it provides one resources, it provides education. I've developed a course that I'm working with some of the hospitals trying to get it implemented to help caregivers. It has videos, it has speaking things, it just has a variety of things. And the other thing that I've been providing is just one on one. I had a young son and daughter that their dad was in the intensive care unit, and I met with them like, I don't know, 3 times, and they're like, okay, what do we do here? How do we do this? And they needed resources. And I'm like, okay, here's who you call, here's what you do. So I did that one on one consultation with them and just kind of help them understand what was happening, not only the nuts and bolts of
Right.
care, but the emotional aspect of it. And I think that made a huge difference. And we also do a virtual support group. So, I try to meet as many needs as I can. And I tell you, every need I meet, I try to meet, there's another need out there. So it just keeps evolving. So, but it's been good. It's been good. I think I've reached probably, gosh, probably now, I don't know, several thousand, maybe 3 or 4 thousand caregivers. And if I made one little difference, made them smile or made them be like, oh, I'm not alone, my work's done. I'm
Mm.
good. Yeah.
So many of our listeners have a role similar to caregiving, care
Mm-hmm.
partnering, but all of our listeners at one point or another along the way struggle with despair. And you
Mm,
just kind of begin to lose that heart for life, and they feel apathetic, a term you used earlier, but it's one I think from time to time we all feel.
mm-hmm.
As we get ready to shift into the final 7 questions, they're called Live Inspired 7.
Okay.
For those of us struggling today, those of us carrying the mulch by ourselves, those of us wondering, how do I step into tomorrow when today is so difficult? What encouragement would you give us?
I think the encouragement I would give you is first to just stop in what you're doing, because I think we our mind just go like this, and I think if you can just, for me, if I can just stop and sit down and like, okay, this is tough, but I can do this. I can do this. And then I think being vulnerable and reaching out to others and say, I'm having a bad day. Sometimes my bad day, I reach out to God. Sometimes I reach out to a friend. Sometimes I journal, just to kind of get it out there. And then sometimes when you say it out loud or you write it down, you're like, okay, yes, this is a bad day, but yesterday was a good day. And you have to kind of hold on to those good days.
Hmm. Stack the good days. What a great
Yes.
reminder from someone who has dealt with many bad days and has joy in her heart and hope for tomorrow. So, Lana Wilhelm, we wrap every conversation around here with 7 questions. The very first one is, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Oh, well, you're going to laugh. I've read a lot of them, but as we were talking earlier before the show, I had read your book in January. One of the ladies in my Bible study knows your mom. I mean, everybody knows your mom. But
You mean the
anyway,
mayor? The mayor of St. Louis is well known, Susan O'Leary.
yeah, it's too cute. But I had read your book, and you have a section, your because. And it really touched me because I thought, okay, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for my own glorification? Why am I doing this? And it was because God desires me to advocate. And then my second because was because I needed a purpose and a mission to keep going. I think everybody needs to wake up with a purpose. And then lastly, because caregivers need support. So I think your book and that chapter just helped me to be like, I can do this. I can continue. I can help others.
Nope, no brownie points given today when you pick the book written by me. But the my heart is full hearing that that little section on purpose mattered. It matters to me. I most days I don't feel like doing what I do, if I'm being
Hmm.
real. And so you've got to have a cause greater than the excuse you're about to give. Because who
Hmm.
can't make an excuse on why they're not going to show fully? So thank you for recognizing because you are
Hmm.
called to this, because others need hope from you, because you are ordained for a moment such as this. What's one positive characteristic or one beautiful trait you possessed as a little girl growing up that you wish a more seasoned version of her might model more today?
Probably that adventure side, taking on like, oh, I can just do this. As a child, you didn't know you had limits.
All right. It's not
you
cool.
just you just did whatever you did. And and that independence and that freedom. And I wish I had that freedom again.
Mm. If your home caught fire and all living things are out, and you have an opportunity of running back into your home and grabbing one item, what's that one physical thing you'd come racing back outside with?
Probably the pictures of my kids and my grandkids. I mean, everything else can be replaced. I've learned after this that material things really don't matter. I mean, it's nice and it makes you feel good for the moment, but it doesn't solve your problems. And, so, me going to Target and buying a lot of things and coming home, at the time you're having fun and it's good. But once you get home, it's like, "Uh, okay, whatever." So, yeah, I think probably family pictures.
If you could sit on a bench on a perfect day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be seated next to?
Oh, probably Tom Hanks.
Wow. He spent a lot of time on a park bench as Forrest Gump. He would be
Exactly. Yeah.
intriguing to visit with.
I just think he's played so many different characters in so many different movies, and yet he has stayed committed to his wife for all this time, and he's stayed. I don't know. He seems real. I
Yeah.
would like to talk to him. The other person I would love to sit on a bench with is Mother Teresa, just because uh, I don't know. She just inspires me, and she just requires so little, required so little in life. So I think probably those two would be my people I'd like to, a celebrity and my spiritual.
A celebrity and Tom Hanks. So, what's the best advice that Mother Teresa, Tom Hanks, or anyone else ever gave you?
You don't have to do the big things in life. It's the little things in life that add up. It's getting up every morning and deciding I'm going to take on today. It's not, I've written 20 books. I've done these great things. That matters very little. The important things is build on those small things because that's what falls apart. When the big thing falls apart, it's all the little things that are what you miss.
Hmm.
It's not the big thing.
If you could go back in time a few years to when you were 20, so 4 years after you
Mm.
lost your brother, and you're midway through nursing school, and life changes are about to erupt into your journey, what advice would you give yourself at age 20?
Oh, gosh, that this will pass.
Hmm.
That, the future is what you will make it. Your future does not depend on your past. You can carry it with you as much as you want, but you don't have to. And, you can let it go. You can let it go.
Lana Wilhelm, author, speaker, coach, nurse, ICU nurse, neuro nurse, spouse, mother, grandmother, a whole lot of other jobs. Sounds like landscaper being one more of them. It has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
Mm. She gave joy to people around her.
Lana Wilhelm dealt with profound challenges, oftentimes quietly, and gave joy to those around her. What a gift it is, my friends, to seek to do likewise. Lana, where can people learn more about the work you're doing today?
Absolutely. The best place to get started is CarePower Connect. That's the website, and it has a lot of great information. And I also have a podcast. How I got into that, I have no idea. But anyway, it's fun. And that's both sides of the bed. And that's been really a different experience. And I've really enjoyed that. But those are probably, and I'm on social media and all the platforms. So, just look for Stroke Caregiver in, and you'll find me just about everywhere. For social media, it's Stroke and the Spouse Caregiver. That's where I kind of started. And that's kind of my group.
Len, I want to thank you for saying yes to service and yes to a cause greater than yourself and yes to joy in the midst of struggle. My friends, that is the voice, the testimony, the work of my friend Lana Wilhelm. My name is John O'Leary, and today is our day. What a gift it is. Live with your soul on fire.